Have you ever wondered how do designers do it? How do they learn how to design these crochet patterns? How do they learn to size different sizes and make all the different sizes and know all the numbers for the different sizes and everything like that? Well, I'm here to share with you how I personally learned how to design crochet patterns and even more specifically crochet garments. First off, thank you for joining. I'm so happy you're here. My name is Michelle Ferguson, and I'm the crochet pattern designer of Two Brothers Blankets. You can find me at twobrothersblankets.com and on Facebook and Instagram at Two Brothers Blankets. All right, today we are getting into somewhat of a crochet business owner, crochet designer series that I am going to be posting some videos about over the next few weeks to few months. We'll see how it goes. And I just want to share, I've shared how I got started in the business. I've shared how I got, I designed my first pattern and how I put it on Ravelry and my first garment and all that. But I've never really gotten into the nitty gritty of how I learned to design crochet patterns and more specifically crochet garments. Now that's the majority of what I do is garments and clothing and some accessories and stuff like that. But it wasn't always the case. To be honest, I never, ever imagined when I first learned how to crochet, the last thing I thought I could ever do was design crochet patterns. I remember thinking those exact questions that I mentioned earlier. How do they do it? How do they figure out the sizes for each size, the numbers for each size? How in the world do they figure that out? Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be a full-time crochet pattern designer 11 years later. So I want to share how I learned and give you maybe some tips if designing is something you're interested in, being a pattern designer, maybe give you a few tips to help you learn and get started as well. So let's get right into it. I learned how to crochet when I was pregnant with my youngest. I wanted to make him hats. That's all there was to it. I wanted to make little cute crochet hats and have them for him and his brother as babies and toddlers. So I never expected to design, but as we all do, I fell in love with crocheting and just wanted to do it all the time. And I don't know, I learned on YouTube. I learned all the basic stitches on YouTube and by reading a crochet book, like beginner book that I picked up at Walmart. And maybe that's what helped me right from the beginning, that I was reading the instructions as well as watching them. But the first thing I learned to do was, one of the first things was learned how to follow a crochet pattern. I think one of the first crochet designers I discovered was Repeat Crafter Me. And I think she had a hat pattern that I just immediately found on Pinterest or something and tried to make. I did not do it very well, but I was able to follow the pattern. It was on the blog, and I was able to follow the pattern. Then I got, discovered Ravelry and saw that you could purchase patterns from all kinds of designers, and there was just hundreds of them. And I started to get some patterns. So I learned how to read other people's patterns first. Like, I feel like that was one of the biggest factors in me eventually becoming a designer. I learned how to read patterns. I learned the abbreviations. I learned how to read row 1, row 2, step-by-step written patterns. And that helped a ton. And second, I wrote down and learned how to crochet patterns. I learned how to crochet garment patterns. I learned how to follow those patterns. And by doing so, I learned workup styles. I learned different ways of doing things, sleeves, cuffs, ribbing, I learned all different techniques from buying other designers' patterns and crocheting them. Still, like I said, never expected to become a designer. But I immediately got into patterns and loved following other people's patterns. And I think that was a huge factor in me being able to write down or, put down on paper my instructions for my designs and know what what was easy to understand, what was not so easy to understand, what made sense, what didn't make sense, and stuff like that. So I had a lot of practice with patterns and following other people's patterns. Another thing I did was I started testing other designers' patterns. I would volunteer to test some of these new patterns that designers were coming out with, and that gave me a lot of practice on reading patterns, on following them exactly as they are written, understanding them, getting the math correct, like making sure that all the numbers matched up, stuff like that really helped me to learn not only reading patterns and following patterns, but like I said, technique, what makes sense, what doesn't, all the different workup styles from bottom up, top down, side by side, panels, different ways of crocheting garments and things. So I did that for a long time. I was testing other people's designs for them, patterns for them. And eventually, and I've told the story before, I saw a fabric, like a regular fabric sweater, and I really liked the style of it. And I was like, I wonder if I can make a crochet version of that. And that is how I got into my first like designing, no pattern, doing it on my own garment. And it was super simple. It's my Spring Breeze sweater blouse, which is actually, I've changed it to be a different workup style. But the original is I made 2 rectangles, literally just 2 rectangles, sewed them together at the top, armholes and down the sides for armholes, and then at the top of the shoulders. Joined and sewed my sleeves around the holes, and added some trim, and that was it. And it turned out really nice. I really liked it. I wore it. I think I wore it on Easter Sunday the first year, that Easter that I had made it. It was super cute. I'll have to see if I have a picture of it. And I showed it on in a Facebook group or something, a smaller Facebook crochet group or something that I had done it, and they were like, people were asking, "Is there a pattern?" And no, of course, I just did it myself, measured, and figured out how big I needed it to be and all that. And a few of the ladies, the crocheters that I was a little bit closer to in the group, said you should try to write the pattern for it, and recommended that I write the pattern for it. And they're like, "We'll test it. We'll test it for you, and give you tips and see if we can do it." And I was like, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." Right? So I did, and that is ultimately how it all began. But like I said, I definitely recommend being very familiar with reading patterns, not just watching videos and tutorials. Those are great. They have their place. But I feel like almost like following a written pattern is almost like a lost art anymore. I mean, I know a lot of people do it, but a lot of people nowadays have learned to crochet on YouTube, and that's it. Like, reading a pattern is not something they've had to do. So I feel like reading a pattern, following a pattern, because there's so many things that have to be, like, so much information that has to be part of that pattern, and most of the tutorials you see are only in one size and stuff like that. So learning how to read a pattern, learning how to follow a pattern, and make something from a pattern really helped me eventually learn how to design. So I did that, and that was the most simple, basic sweater pattern you could ever have. Like, I mean, I'm sure I did gauge and all that, but I just remember, like, when I was making it for myself, I was just like, okay, I need it to be this many inches long and this many inches wide, and that's all there was to it. So I didn't know much at all. I really didn't. And back then there wasn't as much information, or at least not that I had found about designing. Like, now there's courses and blog posts and YouTube stuff and all that. And I had no clue about any of that at that time. So it took a lot. It took a lot of learning, and it took a lot of figuring it out on my own. I remember the first time I figured out, gauge is how I figure out my stitch number, and gauge is how I figure out my stitch number for size medium and size extra large. And that's it. Like, I remember it was just like aha moment. Okay, that's how I can figure out all these. And so that, I get all excited and just kept designing, kept learning. I'm still learning. I talk about this a lot. I am always learning new things about pattern design and designing patterns and technique and workup styles and stitches and everything. I'm always, always, always learning. Every time I design pattern, what's helped me is really getting out of my comfort zone and designing for other people, like designing for companies, really helped me get out of my comfort zone and learn new things and remember to include certain things and stuff like that. So I'm always learning, and that's my next tip. Like always be willing to learn. I've been doing this for this year will be 10 years designing pattern. And I'm still learning. I've learned new things just recently. Literally this year. It's January. It's the end of January. I've learned something new. That's just how it is, and that's how it should be. Which also means my old patterns suck. No, they don't suck. But for me now, knowing what I know now, I'm like, I got to fix these and make them better, and add to it or add this information or whatever, you know? So that's one thing I'm working on this year is really like improving my patterns. I did some last year and I'm going to continue doing that because I'm continuing to learn and get better. And that's always important in every aspect of life, right? Another thing was I got my patterns tested. Still to this day, I cannot do it without my testers. I can now write a pattern before I actually crochet it. I've learned how to do it. I've learned how to figure out the math, figure out the sizes, figure out the workup, all before I can actually crochet it. Or before I actually do crochet. It used to be I would crochet, write some down, crochet, write some down. Now I can figure it all up beforehand, but I still get it tested. And I get it tech edited, but I still get it tested. Testing will, there's just a different aspect. Tech editing, I recommend getting tech edited too, but tech editing, they're looking at the paper. They're looking at the document. They're checking your math. They're checking for typos. They're checking for errors. Testing says, okay, I'm working this up. I'm trying it on. It's not working right here. It's not fitting right here. The math might work, but the fit might be a little funky or something. That's why I love to get them tested. Plus, tech editors are not perfect by any means. I'm not perfect by any means. They might actually catch something that we did not catch. The tech editor and myself did not catch a typo, an error, things like that. So I always recommend getting it tested and tech edited. Now, I will admit I did not get my patterns tech edited regularly until recently, within the last few years. I didn't see the need. I didn't have the money. I didn't want to do that. Now I've more progressed. I've gotten into more advanced patterns, writing more advanced patterns, more sizes, things like that. I need a tech editor, but I also need my testers. I need testing. So I highly, especially if you're new to it, I highly, highly, highly recommend getting those patterns tested. You'll gain insight that you probably wouldn't have just from a tech editor or just from doing it yourself, like working up the pattern yourself. I highly recommend get it tested, and I really think that is what truly helped me grow as a designer, learn how to crochet garments, things like that. All right, tested, tech editor. I wrote some things down. Now, a few tips as you're learning. So, like I said, I learned from or patterns. That's how I learned like workup styles and stuff. Like that's how I learned to design garments. I said, okay, I've worked this pattern, this sweater, and it was bottom up. I could do that and make it look like this. Like I'm not copying anybody. I'm taking my own stitch combos, my own stuff, but I know, hey, working a sweater up from the bottom up can be done like this. That's how I learned that. So practicing on other patterns and all that is great. But also now, there's courses and things like that you can take for pattern learning how to do patterns, learning how to figure out that math so you can have the stitch count for each size, learning how to do ease and shaping and all that. Like all that I learned on my own. I didn't take a course. I just learned it on my own through trial and error. And I mean, I remember when I first got started, I'll admit it, like I was like getting it tested just to see if I had the right numbers so that I like could get that it would fit that person or that size. Um, because I didn't understand, I didn't know the gauge gave you the stitch count, which would match the sizing, all that. So I've been telling you, when I was beginning, it was it was rough. So now you can take courses that will help you figure out the math, figure out the sizing, figure out shaping, workups, all that. I mean, there's all kinds of designing. I'm going to recommend one in particular, Edie Ekman. I think that's how you say her name, Edie. I think it's Edie. She is amazing. I've taken one of her courses on doing the math for designs and figuring it up, and it's been wonderful. So I'm going to link that in the description for you if you're interested in learning how to design garments. It's a garment designing course. It was very helpful to me. I learned a ton, and I just took this like just recently. Like I said, always learning, always learning. So there's courses now, there's YouTube now, there's blog posts. I've learned how to figure up yardage before I make a project, like not by weighing it, by the number of stitches. And before I make a project, I figured out how to do that by reading a blog post from another designer. So there's so many free resources, there's so many paid resources. And I'm just gonna say it, it's okay to pay for, like, it's a good thing to pay for a resource like that, like a course. It is a business investment, but if you are serious about designing and becoming a crochet pattern designer, you're willing to invest in learning how to do it correctly, right? So don't shy away from those paid resources. People work really hard to give you that information and in a way that you can understand and learn it. And it takes a lot of time to do something like a course. I haven't done a course yet because I know how much time it's going to take. So it's okay to do that. And I would definitely wouldn't shy away from it. I would actually recommend it. So there's courses and all that. And then lastly, I think a lot of it is practice. Getting things wrong, messing up, being like, nope, that's not right. Humbleness, I will say. I remember people would be like, I don't think this is working, or I don't think, and I'd be like, no, that can't be, like it's almost like a dagger to the heart. Like, what? And I've learned that, hey, I make mistakes. They're right. Like, listen to their suggestions. Like, I don't know. You get defensive a little bit when someone's like, I don't know about this, So being humble is definitely helpful. And having an open mind and being willing to learn constantly, take suggestions, just do things differently than what you would think you would do or whatever. Just having an open mind, being humble, being willing to learn, taking your time, taking the time to do things like getting it tested and all that. It's very important. And as you learn and as you design and as you get better, you'll do better. You will grow and you will learn how to do different things and different techniques and all that. So that's how I learned. I really learned from trial and error, honestly. I mean, I like I said, I credit it to knowing how to read patterns, knowing how to follow patterns, practicing other patterns, garment patterns, and learning about workup styles, learning about techniques, things like that before I even considered designing my own. And even when I was considering designing my own sweater, that first sweater that I just wanted for myself, I still never expected to be an actual pattern designer. So here we are. But like I said, I'm always learning, and that's the only way to do it. That really is. There's standards. There's the Craft Yarn Council, which has the standards for designers, the abbreviations, the sizes, things like that. But there's no like college degree you go take for being a crochet pattern designer. You know what I mean? Like, so anybody can do it, but at the same time, not everybody can do it because there is a level of expertise, and there's also a little level of like motivation and being driven enough to learn and to do it correctly. Because once you put it out there, I mean, you are going to have people scrutinize it and tell you you're wrong or question it and stuff like that. Not always, but when you get into a big pattern with 9 sizes, sometimes you can really hear it from some people. So, you have to be able to do your best and put something out there that's quality, especially nowadays with as many designers as there are and things like that. So, I think that's all I have on how I learned and how to get into designing and designing garments. I'll link all those things at Craft Yarn Council, the course, things like that, helpful resources for you if you're interested. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to help. And I'll be back maybe next week. I don't know. I haven't decided how I'm going to do this series, if I'm going to do it like back to back to back or in between like some stitch tutorials and stuff, but I have some other, information on running a crochet business, being a crochet pattern designer, what it's like, time management, how I balance working from home and having kids and sports and activities and a social life and all that. Different ways that I make money, besides just solely selling patterns. Why I charge for patterns. I'm going to make a video about that. And who helps me run my business. So we're going to get into all of that here as we go. So let me know what you'd like to know about running a crochet business or being a crochet pattern designer, and it might make it onto a future video. So give me a thumbs up if you like what you see. Subscribe to my channel. That would be wonderful. And like I said, any questions, leave them in the comments. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for watching.